Good evening, everyone. My name is John, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robertson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is here in Treaty 1 territory, that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Ninawa, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robertson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted to have you all here tonight, both in person and virtually, to celebrate the launch, well, the Winnipeg launch, that is, of the latest novel from master storyteller Heather O'Neill, The Capital of Dreams. It will surprise no one that The Capital of Dreams is a stunning dark fairy tale of a novel, and in its pages, O'Neill reveals once again that she is a master of language that is as delicious as cake and as serious as a gunshot. That is directly from the publisher, and we normally get, with no offense to publishers, terrible copy. But Heather O'Neill, all books are always associated with the most incredibly poetic, weird, and wonderful prose, both within its pages and outside, so I couldn't resist. And a huge thanks to Heather's publisher, HarperCollins Canada, for publishing this book, and to all of you for being here tonight. I won't take up too much of your time, just to go over a few procedural notes. There will be an introduction of our featured author from this podium, followed by a reading. There will then be a conversation that will take place on these chairs to my left. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for all of you folks to ask questions. So please allow those to percolate over the course of the event. And if you do have a question during that period, just put up your hand and I will approach you with this microphone in what is hopefully a non-threatening manner to ensure that all those watching the broadcast can hear your question. And if you are one of those people joining us virtually, please feel free to write your question into the chat and we will put them to our author as time permits. I'll be back at the end of the event to review signing procedure. The only thing I will put in your brains right now is that we will just ask you to allow us to escape the space with our author before you come and join us at a cash desk or at the table by our cash desk. But for now, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's host. David A. Robertson is a two-time Governor General's Literary Award winner and has won the TD Canadian Children's Literature Award and the Writers' Union of Canada Freedom to Read Award. He has received several other accolades for his work as a writer for children and adults, podcaster, public speaker, and social advocate. He was honored with a Doctor of Letters by the University of Manitoba in 2023 for outstanding contributions to the arts and distinguished achievements. He is also effectively an honorary bookseller here at McNally Robertson, as he will be back tomorrow night as well for the launch of his latest novel, Godflare. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that his eagerly anticipated new book, All the Little Monsters, How I Learned to Live with Anxiety, is forthcoming in January of 2025, also from HarperCollins. He is a member of Norway House Cree Nation and lives here in Winnipeg. To introduce Heather O'Neill, please join me in welcoming David A. Robertson.
Oh, there's already one there. I brought my own and there's one here, so now I have two. Hi.
Hello.
How's it going? Good. Oh, I'm glad to be here. I'm really excited to host the event tonight. I won't obviously take up much of your time because this is not my night. This is Heather's night for the launch of this amazing book. I just want to tell you a quick little story, and this is just to, I think, speaks to how much I love this work and how much I love Heather's work, and how I wouldn't have missed this for the world. I was so honored when Heather asked me to host launch. So originally, I always knew was today. I was supposed to be in British Columbia. There's a concert last night for a band I really like, and I bought a ticket there stupidly, and I thought, well, I'd fly to British Columbia and I'll fly back, and I'll zip back today and I'll get here for the launch. I ended up canceling my trip, so I was like, I'm just gonna be here all week. It's all good. Like I don't have nothing to rush around for. And then my son, he plays hockey in Amarillo, Texas, and it just so happened that like a couple of days ago he asked for a trade. So I had to fly down to Texas 2 days ago. And we were gonna drive back together because he has my car down there in Texas. I've been like getting rides everywhere. And so I landed at Amarillo and everything was all good. And as soon as I landed, I got this text from my wife and she said, Cole is having some serious car troubles. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And so I called Cole and he was driving to pick me up at the airport and the wheel like snapped sideways and the car just like completely broke down. And I thought, well, this sucks. I don't know how I'm gonna get back to Winnipeg now. And my singular vision was, I have to get back for Heather. I have to get back for this event. And so we found this like backyard mechanic in Amarillo, Texas. We had my car towed there. And I had to get like 2 new tires put on it. And this guy had to finish it by noon yesterday so I can get here in time for tonight. He finished it by like 12:30 or 1 p.m. I thought, well, that's a little tight. So we drove till like 2 in the morning this morning, slept for 4 hours, woke up, slept in a little bit, got up, and we drove all day today, and we got here at like, I think 5:30 p.m., got home, and came right over here. So this is a great book. That's what I'm trying to say. So, anyway, enough about me. I want to introduce you to Heather. I've had the pleasure of knowing Heather and her daughter Arizona for a few years now. She's incredible. Her work is incredible. I feel like every single book she's done has gotten better than the last. And I'm just going to read her bio for you, and then she's going to come up and do a reading, and then we're going to do a little bit of a chat. So Heather O'Neill, like she needs really an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Is a novelist, a short story writer, and an essayist. Her fiction, which includes When We Lost Our Heads, which I also loved, The Lonely Hearts Hotel, also love that one. I love all of them. Daydreams of Angels and Lullabies for Little Criminals has been shortlisted for or won multiple awards, such as the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Danuta Gleed Award, I probably pronounced that wrong, the Grand Prix de Livre de Montreal, and CBC's Canada Reads. Born and raised in Montreal, Heather O'Neill lives there today. Ladies and gentlemen, Heather O'Neill.
Someone reminds me of the stuff.
The drawer?
Yeah.
I've never used the drawer before. I didn't make a John joke either yet.
It's true, I appreciate your restraint.
You're welcome. I kind of just did, but it's good.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm just gonna read the prologue.
Is that me?
I don't know.
John.
Prologue. There was the sound of gunshots going off somewhere in the distance, but there was no reaction to them on the young girl's face. She was sitting in the back of a flatbed truck between boxes of cabbage facing the road. She looked no more than 12, but in truth she was 14 years old. Sophia was dressed in a threadbare black coat that looked as though it had seen more winters than the girl had been alive. It surely must have been passed on to her. Her hair was tied up on her head with a flowered red kerchief, a pattern that was popular with the peasants. The truck rumbled quickly down the country roads. It seemed to react to every stone it went over. The cabbages leapt out of their boxes and fell back in. The girl looked rather precariously perched, as though one large bump might launch her right off the back of the truck, but she sat up there stoically. She was holding a large goose in her arms. The goose remained still, only moving its neck occasionally to get a better look at where they might be going. The girl held on to the goose as though it were her only possession, as though it was the only object she owned, and there was a good chance it was. People were being displaced all over the country because of the war, and they could be found clutching the most random of objects. Her thin fingers that were gripping the goose were soft and unblemished. How was it that this girl had hands that looked as if they had never worked a single day in their lives? Although she was dressed like a peasant and at first glance would easily be mistaken for one, there was something about her pale face that looked refined. It looked as though it could belong only to an upper-class girl from the capital. She had gray eyes that were common in Alicia and thin, dirty blonde hair that fell in stringy locks from her kerchief. She was not beautiful. In fact, she might have been considered plain, but her expression had a certain conceit and sophistication to it. It was this arrogance the enemy had been so vocal about in their propaganda, the devilish, corrupt pride of the metropolitan elite, whom they wanted to destroy at all costs. But the most striking thing about her was that she was all alone. Were it not wartime, surely some adult would have been with her, but people had already begun to look away when they came across children who had been separated from everyone they loved. She was like a stray dog people avoided eye contact with. It was not at all good to look into the eyes of a broken animal. It was too much to bear. She was a million miles from anyone who could help her.
Thank you. I'm gonna start with the obvious question. I wonder, first, do you want to give like a quick little snapshot of what is the capital of dreams?
Okay, so what is the capital of dreams? Like, do you want me to go in the background and all that, or you want a summary? I'll just go.
Yeah,
I'll just go. I'll just start speaking. So originally, I had this idea of this little girl in a war-torn country, and it was an idea that I had a long time ago, and it sort of had its origin in from when I was a child, stories that my father had told me about his time in the war. And you know how everybody has these oral stories, and so much we learn about life is from oral storytelling. So my dad had gone to World War II. He was the youngest of 9 boys, and with a single mom too. But anyway, so a bunch of them had gone overseas, and then my dad felt that he was really missing out. And he had heard also that the women in Europe fell in love easily with Canadians. And he was like, oh, I want to go. But he was 14 years old, so he went and got a fake birth certificate and went overseas. But when he would tell me tales about the war, they were never about the action or anything traumatic. Instead, it was just about Europe and his travels, his strange travels in Europe, because it's the first and only time he went to Europe. And so they were tales like, he told me that when he was in France, there was a goose that had fallen in love with him and followed him all over France. It was always biting him, and it was really embarrassing in front of the other soldiers to have a goose who was in love with him. And then he had met a fairy on the road, and then, and he had some strange explanation for the bullet wound in his knee. He was like, I was just shot by a German troll. And so I had all these tales, and my uncles would tell them too. And so yeah, that was sort of the backdrop. And then actually, so I went over to Berlin to do a residency there. And that was really interesting, because the relationship between the war and fairy tales. And then actually, so when I was in Berlin, someone told me this tale about a puppeteer, and they showed me his work, and they said he's in Poland. And I loved his work so much, and I really wanted him to make a marionette of me. And I thought, at times when you just have too much anxiety or stage fright, your marionette can perform for you. Like, I could just be behind here with my marionette doing all the work for me. Anyhow, so I went to Poland, and as I was going on the train through the Black Forest, the trees were just so different, and they were like so wicked and inviting, and they're all like, hello there, from the windows of the train. And when you walk through them, I said, oh, now I totally understand the Grimm's fairy tales, because this is where the Grimm fairy tales come from, but it's also where some of the O'Neill fairy tales come from too. So anyways, I decided then I would create a little country there, and who got its borders in World War I, and then now it's sort of the era of World War II, and the enemy is coming back for this land, and they are about to enact a genocide in the country. So it's a new country, and they spent all their time investing in the arts, and they were like, we'll be the most literate country, this country full of theaters and symphonies, and then if anything should happen to us, surely the West will come and stand up for us because we have proven ourselves so sophisticated and wonderful. So they didn't think they needed an army. And so at this point, they're very much in trouble. And the other trip I took was actually to Palestine. I had gone, so then I was writing this book, and then a Palestinian writer, she contacted me and she said, hey, you want to go to Palestine with me? And I was like, I actually do. I mean, this was in 2023 in the spring. And I said, I do, because I'm writing about this country that's occupied. So I'd like to experience how people live under occupation. And we went there, and then we just traveled all over the West Bank. We went to a children's theater, and we went to visit this children's author who reads to incarcerated children. And then we went to this one museum where they had this exhibit where they had collected all the little, like the museum was sort of in the middle of nowhere. And then the people who were running it said, you know, this used to be a whole city, but it was razed to the ground, and it said that it never existed. So they had taken all the little pieces of tile and covered the floor with them, ones that they had found in rubble, ones that had washed up on the beach. And then when you looked at the floor, the intricacies and the beauty on those tiles, you were like, yes, obviously there was once like a civilization here, and it's very like, you know, it's Arabic art, looks like Ottoman Empire. And then as I was looking at it, the entire sort of city that had been razed to the ground just rose up in front of me. And so in the book, I have this idea. So while the country is being attacked, and the first thing what they're doing, because it's a genocide, I mean, in a war, you come for the able-bodied men, but in a genocide, they come for the artists and the children. The writers go first. So the main character, Sofia, her mother is an illustrious feminist author, renowned. So she has her last manuscript, and they're burning all the books in the country. And she gives it to Sofia, and she's like, you have to take this out of the country, because at least it will be one manuscript, one book from Alicia that will survive. And that will be a seed from which, if anybody will want proof that Alicia ever existed, or if people want to, you know, and we can reclaim the culture. So that's sort of the setting of the book. We have Sofia going off with the manuscript in her suitcase.
I have like this theory, but I can't talk about it right now because I'll give away the ending. So maybe I'll talk about it to you after, which is a terrible interview question because I'm not even going to ask it.
No, but it's really funny because I was doing an event in Montreal, and the woman moderating, she just lost control and started talking about the end, and I almost had to tackle her, and everyone in the audience was like, stop it. But that impulse you have to give away endings, it like came over her like an evil demon, and I saw it in her eyes, and I was like, don't do it. I won't do it.
But there are things I want to talk to you about like after, which I'm very upset about.
Okay.
But I won't, that's it. I have no impulse to give away any spoilers. Okay, but it is super interesting hearing about like all the lived experiences and the storytelling and the fairy tales and all of these different things that went into the pot that made this novel happen. The one thing that I heard you talk about recently, I forget where it was, but you had an influence for this that kind of connected to Waiting for Godot.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was super interesting. And I'm wondering what parallels can you draw between that work and your work? And are there any characters in Waiting for Godot that informed any of the characters in this novel? I was wondering specifically about like Vladimir or Estragon, who are like the stand-ins for those two characters, if there are any, in The Capital of Dreams?
Yeah, so it's sort of I came across Waiting for Godot. I think I was 12 or 13, and when I read it, it just made so much sense to me because I was living in this, very violent environment, and my dad would just have these violent rages, and life was chaotic. And then to read this literature, which was kind of looking for a new vocabulary after trauma, and how does one speak after because it was written after the war, and what becomes with language, and why do we even speak, and what is the meaning of how do you even go about brushing your teeth now that that children have been executed. But anyway, so I loved that language, and I was always and then when I was working with Sofia, as she leaves the capital, she meets a goose, and the goose is on his way to the capital to deliver a literary manifesto. And he's very sophisticated and erudite and whatnot. So I wanted to create this kind of Beckett-like conversation. And actually one of the characters in Waiting for Godot I really like was Lucky. And when his hat is off, he just talks and talks and talks. So I wanted to have this, their dialogue and their conversation, because they're together throughout the book. And that was probably for me the most important thing, because I wanted to create a language for that a traumatized child would speak. Because when you go kind of have abuse as a child, you don't have the language for it, and you're kind of in this world. It's like this double bind where then you can't even communicate what's happening to you. So the two of them they express themselves, but it's also the philosophy of children and that nonsensical thing. So I remember before I read it, I reread, I always reread Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland for that sort of how much whimsy you can have, and how just the beauty of the logical conceits of children. And if they were just had that, because now all Sofia has is this goose. So they become a sort of, and they're looking for the black market. You don't even know if such a thing exists. So the black market is kind of like their Godot, because they're always like, let's go to the black market. And
I was wondering about that. I was wondering if the black market was, in this case, Godot, and it seems there is that anticipation of whether or not they're gonna be able to do what they want to do with this manuscript, and if they're going to be able to find this black market. So that's super interesting to hear that. I was wondering, I've been thinking a lot about the title, and I think that for me, thinking about literature and thinking about where titles come from and where they manifest themselves, either before or during or near the end. So for the Capital of Dreams, I was wondering about what did it come first for you, the title, or did it come during the process of writing the story? I found that at times a good title comes to me and helps guide the narrative in some way. And then sometimes it just is something I have to really work at and find the title after I've already kind of written most of the work. So maybe explain, if you can, the title a little bit, and then where it rested for you. Did it come was it there from the start, or was it something that you thought of during the process of writing?
I usually, I'll always have a working title for a book, and then I come up with the title right at the end, literally when the publishers are like, you need a title. I remember my first book, Lullabies for Little Criminals, and my agent was like, look, I can't send it out without a title. And then he's like, get me it before the end of the day. So I was just writing a list of titles. And then a plumber came over, and then I went into the bathroom and I was like, say, look at these titles and which one do you like? And he was like, Lullabies for Little Criminals is a great title.
That's a good title.
And then I was like, if the plumber finds it catchy, then that's good. So this one, the working title was The Mother and the Goose. And and then when I was coming up with the title, I mean, the Capitol is such a character within itself, and for Sophia's mother, Clara Bottom, the Capitol is her whole life, and she kind of considers, because she's part of the artistic scene and that she's kind of renowned, that she has created the Capitol. And some people do that; they become so enmeshed and identify with a city that they can never kind of leave the city. Like Clara Bottom could never leave the capital of Alicia. Right. She loves it, and that thing of having a city that's in a period of growth and magic, and their art, their art scene is so particular. For that, actually, I had based it a bit on the Weimar Republic, like the art scene in Berlin right before Hitler came in and destroyed, killed them all, or they had to flee. Like Bertolt Brecht was on Hitler's top 5 most wanted. And I remember reading that. It's like so interesting. I was like, oh, well, these playwrights and artists, and Hitler's like, they go first. Because he knew that what they were expressing, especially at that time, the Weimar Republic, was they were not into naturalism. They were drawing like poor people, sex workers, people who had disabilities, people with mental illness, this whole sort of new expression of what it was to include being human. And then Hitler was just so, I mean, he was a failed artist himself. And then so sort of at the beginning of the war, he created a huge art exhibition of traditional German art so that people could see what they had lost and how beautiful it was. And then next to it, he had another exhibit that was full of what he called the degenerate artists. And he just kind of scotch taped things on the wall. And then he had opened his grand exhibition, and to his horror, nobody was at his thing, and there was like a line around like 5 or 6 blocks because everyone was like, let us see the degenerate art. This is wonderful. There's something about art that, it needs to encompass perversity and diversity and all those things. So yeah, I was really excited kind of creating the Capitol. It seemed like it was my capital a bit.
Yeah, and I think, I'm jumping ahead here, but you don't know that, I know that. But I'm kind of thinking now a lot about the role that art plays in this novel, but I think like in general, the role that art plays in our country, in our society today, and how important it is. Like it houses everything meaningful for us. And so the mother, Clara, obviously entrusts this manuscript with Sofia that she has to smuggle out of Alicia. And I think like what I thought a lot about when I was reading the book was that we're living in a time where art, like more than ever, feels under attack. And the stories that art offers to us is also under attack. And I wonder if would you read the little paragraph I circled? This one right here.
As soon as they were safe in their apartment and the door was locked, Clara broke her silence. When you are singled out by the enemy, you must respond in kind. You must accept the challenge. You must recognize the new power and importance it gives to you. The enemy has directed their ire towards me because my words are a threat. My words are a tool that can undermine all his hate and lies. I will show him that he cannot erase our history. As long as there is one writer with all the words and ideas of Alicia in her head, this country will flourish.
That's amazing. That's one of the passages I was like, there's a lot in here that I was kind of took my breath away. This passage really stood out for me. And it made me think, and there's another one later, I'll read this one just because it's very short. And you said, we will stay together and resist, and if our army is defeated and all our soldiers are gone, we will continue to resist. Everyone who stays should now be considered a soldier. We will fight them with everything we have. We will fight with kitchen knives. We will fight them with our songs. And if you don't think our music is a threat, then ask yourselves why they are trying to ban it. And I love that so much. And I wonder if you could just talk about the role of art in our lives and where you think these attacks originate from, like whether it's in Canada today, which is happening, or how that is represented in your book, and how does the Capitol Dreams address and offer even answers to like these real world issues?
Oh, that's a big question.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. I think there's something about a book. I mean, yeah, if you look in the world today, I mean, what's happening in the news, everybody is trying to control the narrative. And you realize just how important narrative is. And writers are extremely dangerous because they can write a narrative about something and completely change people's opinion. And they can take a group of people that are oppressed and that are, you know, demonized and turn them into these wonderful characters, which is very destructive for the powers that be. And yeah, and for me, I mean, I think writing is magical. It's a magical act, and I think you do too. And I think when you write things, they come into being. Like I think reality, like life mirrors fiction instead of fiction mirroring life. And writers are just able to conceive with their imagination new ways of seeing things that haven't been created before. Everything comes first in novels and poetry. So yeah, I think that's why they're afraid of writers.
I agree. Yeah. You talked about the goose already. I just feel like I want to talk about the goose. In public, we can't talk about what I really want to talk about. But I guess what drew you to the idea of having a talking, I know you kind of mentioned that before a little bit, talking goose in the story. How are you able to shape the goose's personality into a character that became, I think, very unforgettable and iconic? I know that when I write characters, sometimes I draw on all these different inspirations, or even characters from fiction or real life that I know of. I think I'm thinking about a squirrel in one of my stories that I really fashioned after trickster spirits, and trickster beings. What kind of influence was there for you in creating the goose's personality? Because it is this. I mean, it's such a powerful presence in the story, and he has such incredible things to say. I'm just wondering what went into creating that character.
I love that we're talking about a goose in this way.
I do too.
Yeah, because he was a goose, it had to be, it was a lot of working on his personality, because he was also a contrarian, and I like the idea of him. He's always complaining the whole time, and just he blames everything on Sofia and their situation, and just this bundle of negativity. But at the same time, he's so lovable, and he's so vulnerable, and he's so pompous, and yet has the most fragile ego. So he just, I mean, I'm like, he must have been a poet in his last life or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there was also, and the goose, it had to do with Mother Goose kind of stories, and so that was one of the influences. And it was a goose, and he was, he is very emphatic about, he has a lot of difficulty with swans and the way people like swans, and they're always in art, and a swan is such a metaphor, and he's, at one point he's like, actually a lot of people will consider a goose more beautiful than a swan. So he's like, there are no ballets called Goose Lake, my friends. So that whole thing, the whole time, at one point he's trying to do ballet, and then he's just like, no, I'm a metaphor for these times, and so somehow, even though he's pompous, he's at the same time of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
the voice.
Swan envy.
What's that? Yeah, yes, swan envy.
Yeah. Another character I think a lot about is Sofia, and just because you have this long line of characters in your books, these young kind of female characters, all the way from baby up to Sofia, and I'm just wondering, for you, is there a connection between the strong female characters that you've written over the years, and do you see in them things that they share or that they've grown into, or and what might, you know, set them apart as well? Like how have your characters grown over the years in the novels that you've written, in all these really amazing, strong female characters that you've created?
Yeah, it's always, I'm always kind of, like I once heard this interview with Maurice Sendak where he said it's like there's a scratch in the record and he's kind of stuck fixating on childhood. They're like, do you like children? He's like, no, I hate children. But but he just loves, like he himself is somehow always stuck in that peculiar time of life where he was like he felt alone and alienated. So yeah, and that's why it's a bit of a fairy tale, because I find fairy tales often speak to the journey of the young girl and the sexual dangers and all these sorts of dangers that you don't really realize are coming for you until you get to be that age. And so yeah, Sofia was one of my little awkward, one of the things they all had in common until Sofia was that they were motherless. And so this time I was like, I will not forget to give someone a mother. And then so I created Sofia's mother, and then I was thinking of, you know, because I always have such a, you know, I was abandoned by my mother, so I always had a problematic feelings towards her, obviously. But so I created this woman who was, you know, egotistical, a buffoon in some ways. And she, although she has all the greatness, because she's, you know, she's a brilliant woman, she also has all the annoying sort of behind the scenes, which we know, aspects of being a writer, which is like they're constantly jealous of other writers. They're always like worried, you know, just anxious and like so self-involved and walking around the house talking about themselves. And then it was funny because I was like, oh, what a great portrait. And then my daughter read it and she was like, oh my, and she's like, I have something to tell you about Clara. And I was like, what is that? And she's like, Clara's you.
I was wondering a little bit about that. But
yeah, it's all, and because also I had this, I mean, Arizona and I are so close now, but when I first had her, very soon after, I would say maybe 5 or 6 days, that I immediately realized this was a mistake. And I was like, the feminists were right. Writers should not have children. This is incompatible with an intellectual life. So Clara kind of has that division too. So I've always kind of felt, you know, and then I decided I don't want children. This is my assistant. And yeah.
I was wondering too, like, because this is really your first character with a mother figure. Yeah. I was wondering, as much as Clara is probably a representation of you in some way, mm-hmm. Is there any of Arizona in Sofia's character? That's what
she and all her friends are trying to figure out now. Yeah. So but no, I think Sofia was like this feeling of like what it is like when she embodies what it's like when you're rejected by your mother, which, you know, it's one thing to have your mother die, but there's another thing to have your mother say, I don't want to raise you and I don't want to have anything to do with you, which is not Sofia's case, but somehow I was embodying that feeling of awkwardness when you don't have a mother who's, you know, told you that you're the most wonderful, amazing creature on earth, and it's always like, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was going to my friend's house, and I'm like, oh my God, their mothers are all like obsessed with their beauty, and they're not even particularly attractive. So she's awkward in that way. So she's really kind of having to, so when we meet her, she has ambivalent feelings towards the mother, and then kind of the goose in a way, and is channels a bit of Clara. Like sometimes you hear the goose and it's like, oh, is that actually Clara talking? Because when I was creating the goose, I want two of the influences. I wanted him to sort of be like Simone de Beauvoir and Samuel Beckett, like a combination of the two. And then as I was doing the research, I found out that in their later years, they actually lived, Samuel Beckett and Beauvoir, on the same street at other opposite ends of it, and they hated each other's guts. Which seemed appropriate, because somehow the goose he's a conflicted individual.
Yeah, and I think their relationship reflects that too. It can be like it's very much like a relationship where they seem like they have this genuine affection for each other, but so much of it is adversarial too. And I found that the dynamics of it were like really well done, and it was it made the relationship between so authentic, and the payoff of that made it worse. Whatever that might be. I had a couple of like questions, just because I'm gonna have you in front of me, and I feel like I'm a product of a lot of the writers that I've looked up to and admired over my lifetime, and you're one of them. And I wonder, like, for you as a writer, like what are some of the voices that you've read, and the stories that you've read, and the authors that you've admired? Like what are some of the authors that you've known or you've read that who has helped to make Heather who she is today and shape the voice that you have?
Well, I think a lot of what we read when we're young kind of makes such an impact on you. And I remember the first book that I started reading over and over again was Anne of Green Gables. And then I remember I started looking for, I really liked, as most children do, I really liked orphans, right? And I mean, it's strange when you think about it. It's like your kids are reading about orphans. They want you dead so they can get on with their adventures in some sort of fantastical way, right? Like none of these children's books would happen unless, like, it starts off a rhinoceros ran over his parents. Now for the adventure. And then, but I was looking for adult books that way, and I remember discovering Jean Genet, who had this philosophy. I read this book by him once, which actually started as an article because, and one of the characters, Abelard, is slightly based on Jean Genet, who is a French writer who, what's his tale? He was, raised in an orphanage, and his mother was a prostitute, and then he went on to a life of crime, but then he became a writer. And anyway, so in France, they asked him for the major newspaper, will you write an essay for us on the condition of impoverished children in, juvenile detention facilities? And so he handed in the essay, and it was just basically saying that abused and poor children are like magnificent, and they are going to rule the world, and they're going to come into your house probably and slit your throat, and it'll be good because they're geniuses, and the abandoned child has a gift that nobody else has. Of course, and then I was reading this as a child, it's very important to me. The newspaper was like, are you kidding me? We can't publish this nonsense. That's not what we're looking for. And then Maxim Gorky, I remember reading his book called My Childhood, which is just a horrific childhood. And I was like, great. And they made me feel very comforted, because I was like, they went through these insane ordeals and then they became writers. And then, but then sort of in the Canadian literature scene, like Miriam Taves was influential. And then I remember she had read an early draft of Lullabies for Little Criminals. And she's like, it's great. I was like, do you have any edits? She's like, no. It's like, okay.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
It is nice though.
No
It
edits?
was, yeah, because she was the writer in residence at a library. And yeah, a lot of and I went to high school in French, so there was a lot of Quebec writers like Marie-Claire Blaise, and a lot of that's probably why I read so much French stuff. But yeah, but then the Canadian scene was so interesting to me, like Ondaatje and Atwood and all those characters, and the idea of writing that was coming out of Canada. And I just read all of it when I was a teenager. They had those McLennan Stewart classics. I remember Margaret Lawrence. I just loved that.
I want to make sure we leave time for people to ask you questions. I have one more question for you, and then one other thing.
Okay.
And this is selfishly probably for me a little bit, but I was wondering about like process for you in writing a novel. What's the kind of the process that you go through in sitting down to actually create, draft, edit a novel? Like, I know for me it's like, I have to be in the dark, and I listen to music, and I do it late at night, and all those things. Like, what does a novel look like for you when you sit down and actually work on it? Like, what did Capital of Dreams look like when you're creating it, when you're actually writing that story?
Well, I write by hand, and
You do?
yeah. Do you not?
No, I wouldn't be able to read what I wrote. I'd be like, what is this draft? I don't. It's like chicken
There's
scratches.
something, it just like, because I always think of it as like as a magic wand, and it just connects me to like the subliminal whatever of writing. Because for me, there's this undercurrent of language that is magic, and it might be because I have an Irish background, so the Irish language was supposedly given to the people by the faeries, and we call it Gaelic here, but there they just call it Irish. But even though that's gone, when you write in English in Ireland and you feel the fairies writing with you. What am I talking about?
It sounds like.
Oh, my process.
Yeah, I mean, I like where it was going anyway.
Then actually I have this funny story because I'm so convinced that writing is magical, and now I'm working on this book and it's about witches. And every time I start talking, like writing about the magic, strange things happen. And then, so I was writing about this witch trying to like summon a familiar. And then I went into the kitchen and it was like filled with mice. And I was like, oh my God, it's terrible. I can't write about these magical spells without hell breaking loose. So I called the landlord, and the landlord came with the exterminator. And I was like, there are mice everywhere. I've never seen anything like it. And the exterminator says to my landlord, is it possible there was just one? And my landlord's like, yes, probably. and then the exterminator was like, well, I wonder if it was because of flooding that there's now a mouse. And I was like, no. I have to take responsibility for this because I'm writing about witches. And I was writing about familiars, and then I summoned these mice. And then the landlord just turns to the exterminator and she's like, she's a writer. The process.
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty good answer anyway.
I write like tons. I do like a wild first draft. I usually have an idea of the beginning and then the ending, sort of where it's going to end up and how. And that's kind of all I need for a direction, and then kind of, so how did they get from here to here? And then I just write wild scenes all over the place. And then it's, at the end, I'm literally like, where is the scene about the butler? And I'm like, oh God. I'm
Right.
gonna find them all over the place.
It's exploratory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember actually once with Arizona, she was little, and then I couldn't find my notebook, and I was like, because we had stopped at the Salvation Army and I was shopping, and then she sat on the couch and she had taken out my notebook and was drawing on it. And then later that night, I looked in my purse and I was like, where it's my notebook. That's the ending of my novel. I was working on that scene. And then she was like, I don't know. And then we went to the Salvation Army and it was on sale for 49 cents.
Oh, that's crazy.
And it was so complicated. I was like, here, I'll just buy it.
You bought the end of your novel.
I did.
That's actually a pretty good story to sell.
Yeah, I looked everywhere and then there it was with all the garbage, you know?
Yeah.
Someone put a 49-cent stamp on it. What is the point? My process, yeah, and then I fix it.
Do you transcribe it when you after you longhand? Like,
Yeah.
You do, eh?
Yeah.
How
How
a lot
else?
of work. I
I'll
mean,
send it to
maybe someone
Jennifer
transcribes it
Madden.
for you, but maybe
Yeah,
Jennifer transcribes. I was thinking, she also says you write a lot about cats and she gets you to edit out the cats a lot. Were there cats in this novel that you edited out?
no, because I know, because if anyone read The Girl was Saturday Night, if you can believe it, my editor was like, get some of these cats out. And it's still filled with cats.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's always very like,
Yeah.
here we go with the cats, Heather. Because
Yeah.
once there's one cat, I just love writing about cats.
Apparently, I like writing about pop culture, and
Yeah.
I've had like so many lyrics and Dear Prose that she called me up one time and she's like, you know, you have to pay for these, right, Dave?
Yeah.
So I'd like edit up all of the lyrics because I don't have enough money to pay for all the rights to that.
I know, I actually, I just invent song lyrics from that because it's
Yeah.
really hard to track things down. Because like in my first book, I had a lyric by this Quebec singer Felix Leclerc, who you know, there's like highways named after him. There's a huge statue. He's like a huge figure in Quebec. So I wanted a lyric of a song, and then so my New York publisher was trying to get the rights, but you know, and his family, you know, families of famous people are when they die, they're insane. And so it was this whole rigmarole, and then she was like, oh, so much trouble for some singer no one's ever heard about. And I was like, well, not when you're talking to the Quebecers.
Right, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do questions right away, but before we do, I know that Arizona's birthday was yesterday.
Yeah.
And I know that also that it's your birthday tomorrow.
Yeah,
And
nice.
yeah, and so I wanted to give you a present for your birthday. So I thought I'd give you a present for your birthday. I'm not gonna make anybody sing happy birthday to you. That would be embarrassing, I think, maybe. But I got you this. It's a goose for you. And you can read that. Happy birthday to Heather. Happy birthday, and thank you. I thought this was a goose that we could keep, or you can keep. And how about before we ask questions, I wonder if we can give one more round of applause to Heather. Now, John is going to magically appear from behind where he's been lurking. And if anybody has a question, John will come to you and he will stick the microphone in your face. And then you can ask Heather a question. So, did anybody have any questions for Heather?
I promise to do it more gracefully than David.
Well, I guess two things. One, can you turn the duck around so we can see your face?
It's a goose.
Goose, sorry,
Yeah.
goose.
Oh.
How, at what, like, not what age, but how did you decide, at what point in your life did you decide, I'm gonna be a writer and I'm gonna make money from it, and that's gonna be my life? What was it, what was that process like? Was it instantaneous or was it an evolution?
It was, when I was 7, I got a journal and I started journaling, and I just loved it. Like, it just felt so, like I almost had graphomania, like where I would have to get home and I was like, where is my journal? And sort of there was something about looking at the world and then just taking down notes of what I thought was important. And yeah, and then I continued to write. And like I was always reading. And then I had an elementary teacher in grade 5 who said that my writing was great. And you know, someone was telling me the other night, like English teachers ruin so many people's lives by telling them they have good stories. because then they go and become writers. But it was just, I think it was the one thing that I loved and felt that I was good at. So I was, even for as long as I could remember, I wanted to grow up and write books. And then somehow, and also I was so obsessed with Anne of Green Gables that I didn't know how quite to possess her. So I was like, maybe if I start writing books, I can get into that fictional world and find Anne, kidnap her, bring her home. Does that make sense? But one thing that's funny though is, so, you know, my dad had only gone, who had raised me, had only gone to grade 3, and then, you know, he was a criminal and all these, a nonsensical life, but, you know, real interesting. He was a very funny man, I suppose. What's the point of this? Oh yeah. So anyways, but I had nothing to do with my mother's side of the family. And then when I was older, I kind of looked them up and to see what they did for a living. And it was like, way back to the 1700s, they were all writers. And then I was like, you know what? Don't even bother raising your kids. They just are who they are. Like in similar subject matters, it was just so interesting to me. Do you know what I mean? So I was telling people, like, don't bother. It's not worth it. Flat from me.
I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about place in your novels, and especially in your early novels, they're just like so rooted in like a real place and in Montreal, and just that kind of layer between like a very real place with like the whimsy and kind of the magical realism, and then what it was like moving into this story, which is a very made up place, and how you kind of like find your way through that.
Yeah, so it is true. This is the first novel that's not set in Montreal. And for me, Montreal in the books, but it didn't feel any less real to me when I was creating it. And then even sometimes when I write about Montreal, even though I'm using the street names, it seems, it's such a kind of heightened, magical realist. It's Montreal through such strange rose-colored glasses that it almost seems like a fictional magical story. Because then some people bring up, they'll reference like The Girl of a Saturday Night or The Lonely Hearts Hotel and refer to them as magical realism. And I'm like, actually, nothing magical happens. I just create a city where it just seems like I just push the magic in it, I think. Yeah. Yeah, then but even because when I write historical fiction too, what I do is I find like a time period that I just have known and really been interested in, and then with the first draft, I'll create it with all the details that I like, that I've stored up, so that it looks very much like say a Victorian world, but one that interests me. So everyone has striped socks and giant crinolines and they're toppling over and all the things that. So it's a very stylized kind of world.
One of the things that when my wife and I read your books and we love to discuss afterwards is your language and your use of metaphor and analogy. And I was always wondering, is it that when you're writing a scene, that really creative language comes to you in those moments and then you make those comparisons? Or do you think of these great visual images and sentences and then kind of tack it onto a scene? And one of the ones that we've talked about before is in one of your novels, the main character is putting on a sweater and her head is kind of bulbous in the black sweater, and you said she looks like a pawn piece from a chessboard. So it's like really easy to see in your mind's eye. I thought, did she think of that and then add it to the scene, or did that come organically from the scene itself?
It happens both ways. Like, it will usually happen organically, but it's like I'm because I work on the scenes, like I always overwrite a scene and like all these details, and then sometimes if there's some, you know, I'll just describe it 10 different ways and then choose the one that I like the most. But then I also, it was more when I was younger, in my earlier books, where those ones that I do, because I used to have a notebook just filled with pretty things. And then when I was writing lullabies for little criminals, I was like, oh, what about this useless notebook of pretty things? And then I was like incorporating them in fiction, but into the story. But they definitely come both ways. Yeah, both.
And we do have time for one more question. Perfect.
Heather, we're such big fans of your work. If that wasn't clear before, we have our own book club where we're the only two members. But I was just wondering, in this book, I won't give away any details, but in The Capital of Dreams, the goose's obsession with the manifesto, I thought that was so interesting, and because he's so smart but also fragile, the whole book I'm wondering, does he have this thing? Like, what is with the goose's obsession with the manifesto, and kind of how did you think of that, and what is the meaning of that for you?
Yeah, so I was also wondering that about the goose too, because sometimes like you just never know what, like you have a scene, but it just never gets written. And I was like, when is the goose gonna write his manifesto anyway? So does he have a manifesto? Or is he just pretending? And so I had this manifesto once that I wrote that had like a couple of lines in it that I written years ago, and I was like, oh, the goose's manifesto will be my manifesto. And it's sort of, a lot of what the goose says is how I think about writing. So yeah, I just kind of, and so I collaborated with the goose on that.
I will turn things over to you both if you have any parting words of wisdom before I offer procedural notes.
I mean, it's your night. I really thank you for asking me to do this, because I just love you, and I think that you're gonna love the book. So yeah.
Well, thank you, David. I always tell people David's like my favorite person. And Arizona too. I think you're the one person we both agree on. Anyways, thank you all for coming and joining me tonight. It means the world, and for reading my books.
Thank you both so very much. We will now be moving along to the signing portion of the evening, so we'll ask you all to remain in place for just one moment while we safely transport Heather to a signing table just beside our cash desk. At that point, please feel free to follow us out in a merry procession. I will be wandering down the line with a Post-it note to write your name down so that you can spend more time actually conspiring rather than spelling when you get to the table. Please note that you can have a book signed before you pay for it, but we do humbly ask that you pay for the book before you leave. We're so enormously grateful to HarperCollins for many reasons, but particularly for publishing this book and making sure that Heather can add Winnipeg to her tour. We're always grateful to have David A. Robertson behind the microphone here at the store. He'll be sleeping here in the space until his book launch tomorrow. And thank you all for being here today. It was so lovely to spend the evening with you. Please give another warm and incredibly raucous round of applause.